Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everyone. The folks were still streaming in as I was coming in, so I knew we had just a little while. But this is a sort of event that we dream of having, because you look around, you see that all parts of the University of Richmond community are represented here. We've got, I sense, members of our military science program here. That's because I'm just sort of plugged in. I've already been quoting the line you gave me about the flagship thing. Feel free to tell me more apt analogies. That would be good. People from Osher, alumni. I see Herb Peterson. Good to see you. How you doing? First time I've seen Herb since his retirement dinner, I think. Provost. And what could possibly bring such a group of people together, people from cutting across all across the university? Well, it's that we have two members of the university community that people always want to hear, because people always are learning from them. One, of course, is our beloved Chancellor Heilman, who has been such a great ally to me every day that I've been president, just as he's been a great ally of the university for so long. I'm looking forward to hearing him talk. And Colonel Thorsness, who has been a frequent visitor to campus and a great presence on the campus and an inspiration to many people. So I welcome all of you, and it's my pleasure now to turn the microphone over to Sandra Peart.
Thanks, Ed. I'm so pleased to see this room full. It's always great to see a room that where people are sitting at the edges. Hello, Christine. Thank you all for coming today. And let me, on behalf of the students, the faculty, and the staff of the Jepson School of Leadership Studies, welcome you all to this program. We're here today to learn about two books with significant leadership themes. I know you'll be struck by the power of the personal stories and the similarities between them. Our topic today is reflections on lives of purpose, character, country, and leadership. I'll introduce our authors more formally in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to say a few introductory words about my reading of these books. Perhaps the most persistent theme that I found is the extraordinary power of language, of communication, of words. Leadership, as we say in the Jepson School of Leadership Studies, is about a process, or is a process, by which influence is realized. That presupposes interaction. Robinson Crusoe on his island is neither a leader nor a follower. He has no one to influence, no one with whom to interact. When Friday shows up, then there may be leadership on the part of Friday or on the part of Crusoe. So these are books that are filled with stories about how a leader talks. We read in Bruce Hallman's book, An Interruption That Lasted a Lifetime, My First 80 Years. We should all aspire to write this sort of book. And I want to make a note that Bruce brought a copy of his book, and there will be copies for you to sign if you wish after the program. I note that he brought the soft cover of the book. I've got the hardcover here, so just so you know that. But we read in this book, and now I'm quoting, "My effectiveness as sergeant was only as strong as my ability to communicate. What I said and how I said it determined the success of my efforts, whether it was drilling recruits in ranks or instructing them in their assignments. That was when Bruce first began to realize the significance of communication for leaders." He was in this area, I think it's important to note, largely self-taught. You'll realize the significance of this once you hear Bruce speak, of course. We should all be so well self-taught. "I began to notice," he writes, "which approaches were effective and to copy positive techniques I observed in others and to hone my methods." Dr. Heilman concludes that this was the defining characteristic of his many leadership roles. In the very different and yet strangely similar case of Colonel Leo Thorsness, We read in Surviving Hell, a POW's journey, the fascinating tale of men placed together in close quarters, stripped of the usual means of communication. We read about how hard their captors tried to prevent communication and failed. They, as Leo says, bricked up all windows to prevent us from seeing each other and using hand signals to communicate. Leo writes about the all-important tap codes that emerged seemingly spontaneously. This sometimes meant the difference between life and death. He says simply, communications were our lifeblood. With so few of the usual means of leadership or communication available to them, the POWs developed new tools, new forms of communication in order to survive and to influence each other, and it's important to note, also to influence their captors. So we'll now hear these stories from the authors themselves. Dr. Heilman will speak first, and then we'll hear from Colonel Thorsness. And we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Bruce Hallman. And I'm going to say a few words, so you can come up when I'm done, or now, however you want to do it. Can't really tell Bruce what to do, leader or not. Bruce Hallman became Chancellor of the University of Richmond on October 1st, 1988, after serving as President and Chief Executive Officer for approximately 17 years. For the Jepson School, it's important to note as well that he served as the first director of the school as the curriculum was just being developed and this lovely building was being designed. A U.S. Marine during World War II in the Pacific Campaign, Dr. Heilman later received his BA, his MA, and his PhD from Vanderbilt University. A renowned and respected educator, he has served as a consultant and a board member to many educational, religious, and charitable organizations. He writes that he is a Marine once and always. Heilman is a member and former chairman of the board of the Marine Military Academy in Texas, member of the Board of Visitors of the Marine Corps University at Quantico, secretary of the board of the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, member of the board of directors of the Virginia War Memorial Educational Foundation, and a member of the Marines Memorial Association. His motorcycle has been a passion since his Marine Corps days. You just might spot him on his Harley Patriot Special Edition Electra Glide, riding along the roads of Virginia with several fellow bikers, some from his church at First Baptist, some who are University of Richmond employees, and some fellow leathernecks. Dr. Heilman is married to the former Betty June Dobbins of Louisville, Kentucky. They have 5 children and 11 grandchildren, and take great pride, and so do we, in the fact that their 5 children are all University of Richmond graduates, as are 7 of their 11 grandchildren, with 2 more coming along the way. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Heilman.
Dean Peart, Colonel Thorsness, President Ayers, members of the administration, Paul and Phyllis Galante, students of the university, faculty and guests of all designation, alumni with you. I am pleased to be one of 2 individuals invited to reflect on lives of purpose, character, country, and leadership. To be acknowledged as one worthy of representing all of these, even if in attitude and spirit is questionable at a minimum. Several years ago, after speaking at the University of Georgia, I was returning to Atlanta on the back road to catch a plane to Richmond when my rental car stalled near a little country store. I called for rescue and was told it would take about an hour. It was a cold day, and gathered around a pot-bellied stove were men in overalls, rather loudly discussing a variety of interests until I drew near in my dark suit, white shirt, and tie. I was an interloper, and my presence changed the dynamics of the interaction. Presently, one in the group asked, "Sir, are you a minister?" I said no and said nothing else. The conversation lagged. Shortly, he inquired, "Are you a member of the Internal Revenue?" Again, I responded no and offered no further evidence of my occupation. After a few attempts at conversation with a stranger in their midst, he asks, "Sir, what are you?" "I'm a university president," I responded. "Well," he said, "I certainly could tell you weren't a normal person." The measure of one's success in life, as defined by Michael Korda, is the distance between one's origin and one's final achievement. In that space of time, so many paradoxes have transpired in my life that it has been unusual or normal, to say the least, abnormal. I share the platform this afternoon with a distinguished citizen who's done the extraordinary, but we have a great deal in common. We both grew up in Depression years on the farm and shared in the work that was required as a result. We both judged that serving our country was a noble commitment while realizing that we would likely be in harm's way. But here the parallel ends, because while I spent my 4-year military commitment in combat, occupation, duty, and otherwise, I never faced the pain, suffering, and torture over an interminable period of time that was demanded of him. Thus, as I tell my story, you'll anticipate with me hearing his. Just last month, I turned 83 years of age. Thus, my life has been lived during a transformational part of the history of our country and the world beginning in 1926. Mine is a story of a generation called by Tom Brokaw the greatest generation. His perspective embodies the challenges faced by those born in the early part of the 20th century who lived through the Great Depression, followed by the greatest world conflict of all times. From these and other maturing experiences were developed the capacity, determination, and leadership potential essential to advancing the nation beyond anything thought possible before that time. Initially, I intended to preserve some aspects of my life from my family and descendants, but the more I recorded my thoughts, the more obvious it became that my story was representative of many others of my era. Thus, I could catalog a bit of their history by recounting paralleling events of mine. It took me 83 years to write 600 pages of the first 80 years of my experience, so boiling it down to sorghum consistency for you in 15 minutes is not easy. But an exercise writing a 1,200-word article recently published in the U.S. Navy Institute magazine titled, "I Grew Up in the Marine Corps," has aided me immensely. Most who know me today identify me with the activity in which I've been engaged for more than 55 years, college and university administration, 21 years of which involved the college and university presidency. Few of my academic colleagues are aware of the effect of my growing up in a rural part of Kentucky as the educationally deficient son of a tenant farmer, or of the advent of World War II and leading to 4 years of service in the United States Marine Corps. In my recently published memoirs, An Interruption That Lasted a Lifetime, there appears a picture of a high school report card revealing the level of my academic achievements. And in the early years of my life, when I entered the Marine Corps, I lacked adequate credits for a high school diploma. At age 17, I was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds. Just 6 months later in the Marine Corps, I had grown 4 inches taller and gained 30 pounds. Not only did I physically change in the next 4 years, but my outlook on life had changed as well. For many young men, these would have been their college years, but for me, however, they would have been 4 more years on the farm, or driving a truck, or some other occupation quite dissimilar and less fulfilling than the one which became my lifelong profession. Evidence of how I felt about myself prior to military service in World War II was shared in a letter written to my mother after I joined the Marines. We new recruits went up for classification, and I signed up for aviation first choice and communication second. I think that I'll get one or the other, and maybe I'll make something out of myself after all. I guess that'll be a surprise to you and Dad if I do. Having been considered scholastically less motivated and less apt to succeed than my siblings, I yearned to show my parents that I could rise above the shortcomings of my past. I had been a failure because I couldn't conceive of ever needing all that book learning. In letters written to my mother in my early years as a Marine, I alluded to my lack of interest in higher education and mentioned that I might take a Marine Corps correspondence course because I didn't plan to attend college. In another, I referred to my two brothers going off to college, but declared, I can't see going to college and wasting 2 or 3 more years. I want to live my own way instead of trying to learn how to do something out of books. And even later I wrote, don't think too hard of me for not taking advantage of a good education. I've had all of that I can stand. I guess the other 2 brothers will go to school some more, but I don't think that's for me. By virtue of the dearth of accomplishments in my early years, I was ripe for opportunity provided during my Marine Corps years. I wanted to prove that I could succeed at whatever challenge was presented. Each day that I prevailed in boot camp was a success physically, socially, and mentally. I was satisfied that I could and would succeed in living up to demands sometime unmet by some older, larger, and stronger Marines than I. Tasting the pleasure of success came to me on the rifle range in boot camp when following instructions to the letter paid off and I emerged as the top scorer in my platoon. In the Corps, every Marine is a rifleman. Thus, acclaimed as an expert rifleman reinforced my sense of self-worth, self-esteem, and self-confidence. Subsequent to boot camp, I was assigned to gunnery school, where I exceeded most others because I had become convinced that I could accomplish whatever I wanted to do. 4 of us Marines who completed the course, 3 17 and 18-year-old farm boys, and 1 Princeton dropout, bonded like brothers. 60 years later at the University of Richmond for a reunion was a university chancellor, a medical doctor, a successful businessman, and an insurance executive with a Princeton degree. Following combat in the South Pacific, occupation duty in Japan, and acquiring maturity and leadership as a Marine sergeant, I began to envision possibilities for being further educated as I had learned clearly that I should do now what I had failed to do earlier in life, get an education. The GI Bill was my path to successful adulthood, a rewarding career, and a fulfilling family life. Without the transforming nature of my Marine Corps experience, I can say with certainty that I would not have enjoyed the career in higher education which has afforded unparalleled opportunity and fulfillment never anticipated in my teenage years. Having learned from my drill instructor what now meant, I will became more important to my successes than IQ. From the first minute of my association with the Marine Corps, the benefits began to influence my life choices. The cult and a culture of esprit de corps and the pride engendered by being a Marine is unlike any other. By the time I was discharged, I realized my pursuit of a business, professional, or public life would be dependent upon academic and intellectual achievements. The Marine Corps had brought about a transformation that would last a lifetime. From that Marine Corps experience, I gleaned the understanding of what Thomas Carlyle reflected. Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. The rest is history, and embodying a determination to build upon the confidence and ambition that evolved during my 4 years as an active Marine. After being educated through the PhD degree, I have spent 54 years in the field of higher education, and I owe my success to my military service and to all those whose paths I have crossed over the years. Among the many paradoxes resulting from my Marine Corps service is that while I never talked to a general nor saw one up close during my 4 years of service, I have in my professional career served as chairman of the board of the Marine Corps University and of the Marine Military Academy, where Marine generals were president. One of those was the current commandant, General James T. Conway, a brigadier general when I was the chairman of the board and a buck sergeant. At age 83, I still remember what now means. And as a result, while I was still able, I recently completed an 8,000-mile motorcycle adventure from Virginia to California and back, deciding that later may be too late, so I did it now. To put into context the nature of the military experience which shaped my life and gave purpose to everything afterwards, one needs only to observe the flow of the host of young men and women 17 and 18 years of age just arriving on this campus. The foundation for the whole of their lives will be laid over the next 4 years. In contrast, my 4 college years from 17 to 21 were in a very different environment and setting, but one which molded my character, redirected my purpose, and elevated my leadership potential dramatically. Today, every college and university strives to foster diversity, yet will never achieve what I experienced. Among my fellow Marines were factory laborers, college and high school dropouts, musicians, city slickers, and farm boys. They hailed from the great metropolitan cities to little country towns, from remote rocky mountains to plush valleys. They were rich and poor, of all faiths and color and ethnicity. Diversity was the watchword, and as Marines, we were brought together to shoulder the war as brothers. We even had freshman orientation. It was called boot camp. One of my platoon members drowned when our ability to stay afloat for an hour with the weight of heavy gear was tested. The DI's response was, "It's better to lose one of you here than all of you when your ship goes down, sunk by the Japanese in the deep waters of the South Pacific." In boot camp, we learned. At the Hollywood Canteen, dancing with Betty Davis, I learned. At Okinawa, at age 18, aboard ship with Japanese suicide bombers seeking to sink the fleet, I learned. Following a traditional steak and egg breakfast prepared to leave the ship, we were convinced that we were engaged in something monumental in history and worth dying for. We had no idea that within months the war would end. We thought it would last forever. We learned. As we descended a rope ladder to Higgins boats, which hauled us ashore in an atmosphere of subdued tension, we were braced for any consequence. We looked back to see the mass of ships in preparation not only to finish the Battle of Okinawa, but for the invasion of Japan, which would be our next landing in a few weeks. We dug in and spent the night on the beach, feeling even more vulnerable than on the ship, enduring the sights and sounds of combat. We learned. Moving forward toward our base, we passed a Japanese prison camp occupied by relatively few because few surrendered, determined to fight to the death. They were the enemy that we Marines had been trained in detail to defeat. We learned. Existing in mud, wind, rains, typhoons, and destruction, living in the damp and cold, and being always on the alert was surreal, but we learned. We bathed in barrels cut in half, and we ate under whatever conditions we could best improvise. We waited for letters from home, which were the windows of our world left behind, and they came by ship, sometime 4 months en route, as we anticipated the years ahead before the job would be finished. But we learned. Men were loosely, lonely, and restless with either too little or too much to do. There were always a few self-styled vintners who concocted a combination of juices, buried the mixture underground for several days, and then extracted the liquor in all of its fermented glory. From that, we learned. We learned from each other, the younger from the older and the other way around. We learned that the Japanese posted on their fortifications, each man will make it his duty to kill 10 of the enemy before dying. We learned. Finally, we learned that a big bomb had been dropped and that the war would end, eliminating the necessity only 2 months away for invading the homeland where we likely all would have been killed. We had survived. Then walking in the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki a few weeks later, I learned. Many years later, one of my buddies who had walked in those ashes with me died of liver cancer. His wife feels certain that it was a result of those days in radioactive ash. We're still learning. Surviving an airplane crash as a crew member on Iwo Jima and accidents and mishaps of other kinds all over the South Pacific and Japan, I learned and matured and grew up fast. I received a 4-year college education in the Marine Corps, which could not be duplicated in any college I know. But it made possible by virtue of the GI Bill another college education in later years, where I married as a freshman and fathered 6 children before I finished graduate school. Here I continued to learn. There were 16 million of us in World War II, and now less than 2 million remain, and many of those are fading fast. Recently, when I attended a reunion of my World War II Marines of Okinawa days, they said I had to speak because I was the only one who could stand up long enough. In keeping with the theme of the book talk, Military service gave purpose to everything else in my life's journey: character, love of country, leadership, and everything related to these characteristics were owned, strengthened, and determined by the Marine Corps: duty, honor, country. To further confirm the content of my book and to whet your appetite for its reading, I share just a few excerpts from the hundreds of letters, emails, and comments I've received from those who've read it. And I quote some snippets from each. Truth and fiction can be run down the same road, but in your life, truth was more interesting than fiction. You made me realize that I can be a better person. Your book is a tribute to education, our beloved, your excellent writing, and that of others whom you quote. What a pleasure, what fun, what an inspiration. Your book clearly documents how effective the Corps is in teaching teamwork, accountability, and core values. Your book is hard to put down. You're not being too proud to put in it about your childhood was very touching. I found your journey so intriguing that I read the whole book in a few days. This is one of those books I never want to finish because it's really like visiting family. I have been really enjoying your book and can't wait to finish it so I can start it over again. In the introduction, I quote Ben Franklin, who said, "If you would not be forgotten as soon as you're dead and rotten, either write things worth the reading or do things worth the writing." I hope I have done some of both, and that in reading my book, some of you enjoy discovering that fact. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. It's now my pleasure to introduce Colonel Leo K Thorsness. Born and raised in Minnesota, Leo K Thorsness joined the U.S. Air Force in 1951 at the age of 18. He graduated from the 54G Aviation Cadets and became an officer and a jet pilot. In 1966, Thorsness was sent to Vietnam, part of a squadron of F-105s. Before he could return home, Thorsness was required to complete 100 missions. On his 93rd mission, he was shot down over North Vietnam. Badly injured, he was taken prisoner and spent 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp. After the war, Leo returned to America, and on October 15, 1973, President Richard Nixon presented him with the Congressional Medal of Honor, America's highest award for military heroism. Thorsness went on to serve as Director of Civic Affairs in the California-based Litton Industries from 1979 until 1985, and then he moved to Washington and served as State Senator from 1988 until 1992. In 2004, the University of Richmond established an endowed chair in leadership and ethics named in honor of Leo and Gay Lee. The Colonel Leo K and Gay Lee Thorsness Endowed Chair in Ethical Leadership is held by Don Forsyth in the Jepson School of Leadership Studies. I first met Leo and Gay Lee in March of 2007 on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange before the Medal of Honor dinner. I was immediately impressed by his simple message that he writes about so powerfully. I was average and happy to be so, he says. I challenge you to think about that after you hear his story. In 2007, Colonel Thorsness served as the Jepson School's leader in residence. Leo received a bachelor's degree from the University of Omaha, and he went on to earn a master's degree in systems management at the University of Southern California. He's married to the former Gay Lee Anderson, and they are the parents of a daughter, Dawn. Please welcome Colonel Leo Thorsness.
You see now why I asked, I said, please, would the Dr. Heilman go first? And all I can say is I agree with him. Now, any questions? You've made the proper acknowledgments, and Dr. Ayers, and we'd not met before, and it's my pleasure to be here. And it's already been acknowledged, but Paul and Phyllis Galante, I have to. Paul and I spent a lot of years in Hanoi, and thanks for being here. I know people in Richmond know those folks well, but it's always fun to be able to be with them, a top-notch troop. I would like to... I'll start just by saying that night before, I've been on the road a lot lately. The night before last, I was in El Paso, and in the audience, it was a Rotary and a Smith Barney financial group. In the audience, they had invited about 20 wounded warriors. And I met them all first, chatted each one a little bit. Some were PTSD types. Quite a few were pretty severe injuries. Some had their spouses with them, some didn't, or some had a significant other. But during my remarks, people will often say, well, what were the lessons did you learn in Hanoi? And I seldom bring up, but I've stressed it there, and I just want to mention it because it kind of hit home with those people. And that is, the lesson I use the most is, since I've been home, I've never had really a bad day. And it's been a long time. Another way of saying it, and that's, Paul knows that one, is if the doorknob's on the inside, it's a good day. But with those two, the other two I mentioned was how amazed we were as prisoners. Rarely did we have any kind of medicine. Some of us never. And we were basically a pretty healthy group. We were aviators and so on. Our age was average about 33 or so when we were shot down. I was 35. But most things that we get sick from are normal ailments. I'm not talking about cancer and heart attacks, but most things, we heal ourselves. Our body is just phenomenally resilient. It's nice to have medicine that makes you feel a little better, the pain is less and so on, but our bodies are just phenomenal. We heal ourselves. And the other thing, and I was speaking specifically to those people, the PTSD types, and we've all had some difficult times in our life, and I'm fully convinced that most people who go through hard times, and everybody here has been through some hard times, it's all relative, and we'll, again, or whatever, but when you go through hard times, most of us will come out the back end whole. But when we do, no matter how long that takes, we're going to be stronger and better and sharper and better able to handle the next hard time. Our mind and our body, they're really phenomenal what the Lord put together, or whoever you want to credit it with. I want to make some kind of random points that will be not nearly as well organized as yours, sir, but I'll try to keep it going. And one is I want to mention teamwork. And all this is how most of the result of what I became in life is also of the influence I had in the military. I joined, I was 20, I guess. I was an enlisted guy for a while, and then I became an officer. But that influenced and made me. I think I became more of what I would have been and was, but it emphasized it. And point one, teamwork. And I'll give you an example from Hanoi. Everybody here is involved in a team. If you're married, it takes a certain amount of teamwork or whatever. But we all belong to teams. And just to stress how critical they are, and it was kind of a life and death thing there, but I'll just take 3 levels of teams. I was flying Wild Weasel missions, and that was the name they gave. Vietnam was the first war in which there were surface air missiles, SAMs, okay? It took away a chunk of airspace, so our military industry got together, designed some black boxes, put them in a 2-place fighter, electronic warfare officer in the back seat. It was in an F-105, as you mentioned, and an experienced pilot like Leo in the front seat, and they called us Wild Weasels. They have to have a name for every military operation, right? And our job is to go over there, find these SAM sites and kill them, or hold them down while the guys carrying the dumb bombs. It took a lot of bombs in those days, but dumb bombs statistically destroy a target. So we'd go in first, look for these SAM sites, and try to kill them, and then come out last. We got there, my backseater and I, Harry Johnson, we were the 6th Wild Weasel to get to Tak Lee, Thailand, where we flew out of. And that was the first part of this was in '66. And the first 5 teams or crews that got there, well, have no fear, we're here now, you guys, we'll take care of those SAM. 45 days, they were gone, all of them. We lost them all. Harry and I were the 6th crew, and so we had a hard time finding wingmen to fly with us. But I want to talk about focus on that point, but I want to set that up. But on the teams, it was a violent air war. There was a ground war in South Vietnam, just an air war in North Vietnam, and that's where it was real violent up there. There was a lot of MiGs, a lot of flak, a lot of SAMs now, and we yanked and banked those airplanes and sometimes damage to them. But overnight, our crew chiefs, the people on the ground, they worked all night long to fix the least little problem. Every morning they gave us like a brand new airplane. They were so dedicated. People who hung the weapons and fused the weapons. Team 1, the people on the ground. Team 2, I get to pick my 3 wingmen. picked guys who were young, had good eyeballs, weren't afraid to dive through a couple layers of flak, didn't know any better because they were young. But they could put bombs on target. And Team 3, every team has got a key person. Every team's got a key person. In this case, it was my backseater, Harry Johnson. He knew so much about electronics. And there was a lot of gear and stuff in the back seat, and I had a little bit of it. And fact is, Harry, he's kind of like some engineers. You ask him what time it is, and they tell you they'll watch. I'd say, we're in combat. We're up there, and we're getting wild, and we're about to get launched at by a SAM. And I'd say, Harry, what's that signal? He'd start telling me what the antenna looked like. I didn't care what I said, Harry, can it kill us? But Harry was so good, he got us out of trouble before we were in trouble. But the point is, if all three, and the Weasel airplanes, most of them were near Hanoi because that's where the high defense was, the SAMs were. And so if you were shot down as a Weasel, the odds of rescue were zipped to slim. And if all three levels of the team did their job well, we succeeded that day. If any one level of our team failed in that situation, we were either going to be dead or prisoners of war. I mean, teamwork is real serious. I didn't mean to go overboard on that, but I've never had it stressed more. Focus, Harry and I came up with a system. The first 5 Weasels that were lost, we studied everything they had done and what kind of maneuvers they were, what altitude, airspeeds, tactics they used, and we kept track. We talked to everybody who had ever flown with them. We looked at all the loss reports. We wrote down everything that was on here. Harry's from Iowa. I'm from Minnesota. We're not rocket scientists, right? But we kept track of everything they did and wrote that down. We said, okay, we'll do none of those. There must be some, there's got to be another way, right? And we came up with the idea, the SAMs, they go 3,000 feet per second. That's 2 seconds a mile. But even, if you're a few miles away, you got some seconds. So we came up with the idea of going at a high altitude around 20,000 rather than 8 or 4 or what it was. And going about and keeping a good airspeed. And as soon as we got a SAM that launched at us, they always launched 3 at a time, 6 seconds apart. Why they did that? They had 3 launchers, but anyway, that's how they did it. And as soon as we got launched, Harry said, Leo, we got launched. His voice is real high. It's scary now. Just listen to Harry. But and you can see a SAM. The SA-2, they were like a telephone pole with some fire coming out the back of it. And so we're up here, and as soon as we got launched, my wingman are well briefed. I just punched my bike button. I'd say, take it down, Cadillac. Call sign Cadillac. That meant everybody roll inverted, put it in afterburner, pull your nose just about straight down. You're in afterburner, you're grabbing as much airspeed as fast as you can. Well, now that first SAM, you don't worry about number 2 and 3 until you get by that first one. That SAM has got to be arcing down because we're headed down. And now the ground's getting real big, real fast. The fields are getting more clear, bridges, and also you're watching that SAM coming, it's arcing. And it was doing 2 seconds a mile, and literally it was 2 or 3 seconds out, the best you could judge. And if my dive angle was right and everything, and we weren't sure this was going to work the first time we tried it, but the other 5 guys all got lost, They lost them all. And so, and just before the SAM got to me, and just before we hit the ground, I punched my mic button, the wingmen are closed in, and I'd say, pull! And all 4 of us, would just swap ends, and here comes that 5th, and we only had to focus on 2 things, right? This is where I learned focus. If you don't focus now, you never will focus in your life. But every job's got some point in it where you got to get rid of all this nif-naf, I call it, and what's the 1 or 2 or 3 key things you have to know about right now and focus. And we'd pull and we'd swap ends as fast as we could. And it turned out the SAM couldn't make the corner with us. First one would hit the ground if we did it right. Second was here, third one was here. And now it's our turn, and we go up, we roll in, and it was a deadly. Now it's our turn to try to kill them, and it was fair. They tried that on us, so we didn't feel badly about that. I want to mention a little bit about life balances. I'm skipping way ahead. Shot down, spent 3 years in the prison. Was basically most of us were there about 6 years. Paul a little bit longer, but breaking it down, the first 3 years were very different. The first 3 years. Life was very brutal. Torture was normal frequently. The last 3 years, it was abnormal. First 3 years, you lived in solitary cells or 2 or 3 in a little cell. Last 3 years, you lived in big cells, talk out loud. First 3 years, they could hear any sound coming to your cell. It was a beating or something worse, and sometimes. Last 3 years, you were talking out loud, and they even took some bricks out of the windows last 3 years so you could see outside, and it was very different. There was reasons for it, and I won't take the time. But during the 6 years, we didn't have any books or pencils or papers, but the last 3, when you're in a group, this many people right here in a cell this big, there's a lot of knowledge here. I mean, we were all either bachelor's or master's degree. We've been around the world some. We were 35, 38, 39 years old now. So there's a lot of experience there. We're our own therapists, so to speak. When we're going to come home, we talked about what problems will we have. And so we didn't have as many problems as our families were briefed on by the psychologists, because we deeply discussed every issue we thought we might face when we came. That was very helpful. But we all had gimmicks of how to kill time. And one day, I decided in one of these big cell now, about 4 years, we've been there, 4.5 years. I said, I'll keep track of every subject we talk about, just to see what it is we spend most of our time talking about. And number one, we were all aviators. Aviators were good at our job. The longer we've been retired, the better we know we were, you know. But aviating is really fun. I mean, if you like to go fast and pull G's and, you know, you're super on the deck, and aviating is really fun, and they pay you to do that, right? And so I expected that would probably be the number one topic that we talked about. Now, we've been there about 4.5 years, and I built it mentally. We all did mental exercise. I mentally built a little cabinet, and I put little folders, and had a mental little pencil. I put a little mark down each time a new subject came up. And after about 2 weeks, I found out we talked about 20 subjects. That was those 20 subjects that we frequently came back and back. That took up 99% of the time. And rather than work, aviation, come in as number one, which I kind of expected when I started this project, it came in number 17. 17. And I'll come back to the first four, but what I learned from that, I think I learned this from, I know I learned it, I hope it's right, and that is when you're young, especially when you're young, sometimes we get so wrapped up in our job, we totally ignore everything else that's important in life. And work is important. You feel good about milestones. You got to provide for yourself or your family, and it's all important. But it's not the most important thing when push comes to shove. The four items that came up, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you could kind of reverse them around. But fortunately, I could put the same letter on top of them, each one, so I can remember it. And with the mnemonics: friends, family, faith, and fun. Friends, family, faith, and fun. That's what's important in life. And pass it on to your kids or your grandkids or whatever, that spend some time doing those things that in the end, when you don't have much else going for you, those are items that can add a lot of value and meaning to life. The leadership, Paul knows him, Ned Heilman, naval officer, phenomenally good man. When we first moved into big cells, we decided to have a church once, and Ned was a senior ranking officer, SRO. SRO in prison is the boss, and needs to be that way in a prisoner of war setting. And Ned said, so we started gathering up in one in the cell about this big, and the doors over here, and we started gathering up, and we got back there, and the guards burst in, and this is the first time we've been in big cells, and there is courage in a crowd. You are braver. They too, the Vietnamese, weren't sure what was going to happen after we'd been in these little solitary cells for 6 years. And they came in and said, no, you must. They wouldn't let us gather together in the back of the cell, and they won. During the week, we kind of complained, and we should have held church, we should have done this one. And Ned finally said, should we hold church next Sunday? Do you really want to have church? Yeah. He said, no. He said, I need to know each one of you. And he said, are we fully committed to, the word was commitment. So he came around, Ed, Sandra, are you committed? Are you committed? By name. And all 42 of us, he was a senior ranking guy, and therefore I said, yes. So Ned knew as soon as the 42nd guy said yes, everyone, Ned knew he was going to go to Heartbreak. Heartbreak was the name of the torture cell in Hilton Hotel, Wallow Prison, we call it Hilton. Ned knew he was going to end up in torture when we even started this, before it happened. But I'll never see better pure, raw leadership than, by the way, to finish that story, he said, okay, we got a goal, church, we're committed, and we all knew what that word commitment meant, and he said, now what's the plan? And we developed a plan, and during the week, we figured out our hierarchy. We knew all the majors, whatever the Navy calls. I don't know what Navy, that funny rank in the Navy, Paul would know, but 04 or whatever we call it. But we all knew our hierarchy 1 through 43 in that cell, and Ned was ranked number 1, and Ned was our leader. And anyway, the plan was that the next Sunday we gathered up in the back. They came in. Ned said, "Not a problem, communist, guards and interrogator. We're just going to hold church." That didn't go over real well. We knew it wouldn't. They grabbed Ned and they held him off to Heartbreak. The second ranking man stood up and walked to the center of the cell, and here's the plan. He said, "Gentlemen, the Lord's Prayer." We all stood up in our scruffy pajamas and tried to look as reverent and as sharp as we could, and we started reciting the Lord's Prayer. He's leading us. Got about halfway, grabbed him, off to Heartbreak. Third ranking man, same thing. "Gentlemen, the Lord's Prayer." center cell, and a couple lines. Fourth ranking man, probably got our Father who art, or about 4 or 5 words, the loudest 4 or 5 words. We were saying it so loudly, we were drowning out the interrogators, hollering, stop, stop, stop. Guards are running around there hitting people, just chaos in there. Fifth ranking man walks to the center cell, walking kind of slowly. Don't blame him. In fact, I'm beginning to wonder about this plan. I'm the 7th ranking guy. And just before he got to the center cell, somehow it became just about pin drop quiet in that cell. It just happened. And the interrogator said something to the guards to the effect of, this isn't working, we'll get out of here and try something later. And they hauled number 5 with him. 5 people went into torture. They all survived. From that Sunday on, we held church. A phenomenal victory. The cause was good. They held the aces. But the point being, Ned knew he was going to be tortured. For sure, Ned. He was our leader. And maybe the further point is, you're studying leadership, and I'm so pleased to be associated with this only leadership school in the country. But there are costs. It's not just perks and all the good things that come with being on top of that big corner office. There's responsibility. Sometimes there's some, I don't want to say suffering, because that's an extreme case, but leadership is more than just the perks. There's a lot that goes with it that's is not always the fun part. So be ready for it, and you'll be good leaders, better leaders. Very quickly, communications has been mentioned several times, how significant communications is. And as you know, this tap code, Paul's good at it, and I could tap him a message now and he'd get it. But what it was, we had to communicate. Literally, life depended on sometimes, especially those first 3 years. And what it is you throw away the letter K. That gives you 25 letters, and then you line them up in a matrix 5 by 5. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. There's no K, so the third row starts with L, M, N, O, P, right? And then you tap it, which is a very slight, you tap row and then column. And my initial is LT, and I'll see if it works on you. You know where L is. It's the third one down, first one, right? LT. LT. There'll be a pop quiz before you leave. But you can tap pretty quietly. The guard outside just can't hear it if you're real quiet. I can tap to Dr. Heilman through a foot of concrete, and if I'm quiet, we can get away with it. And that was the essence of it. And tapping, it was like typing or Morse code. It's, you learn it, and you get so you can tap back and forth pretty. And by the way, 2/3 of us, of the aviators, for about 4 years, there were 350 of us known alive in the system. 2/3 of us were Air Force. A third were Navy, and there were 5 Marines. Marine are close air support to support their troops, but near the DMZ. And and 5 of those people were captured and brought north. And with that tap code, if Dr. Ayers, let's say you and I are Air Force, we'll tap about 15 words a minute or so. Paul, where are you? Paul glances back. Paul's right there. I would slow down to about 12 words for Paul. And there's a Marine sitting here. Those 5 Marines, we didn't bother to teach them. Now maybe that's not true, but it's a good story. And we're going to take questions and answers. And I just want to close with it was when you're born with freedom, just by the luck of birthright, that you're born in this country, and you're handed this platter of rights and freedoms. I looked at a guard one day. I thought, you poor soul, you can live to be 100 years old, and you drew the short straw, being born into communism. But if you're just by birthright, we're handed this phenomenal, platter that we have, and we choose what schools to go to, what careers we want to go to, and we are so fortunate. And you've just given each of us 15 minutes of freedom to spend 15 minutes with you, and thank you. I think we're going to take questions now.
Thanks. We now have a little bit of time for questions. If you want to go ahead and just put your hand up, and I'll recognize you, and Bruce and Leo will answer. Yes, go ahead.
Working with young people, did they have problems beginning to understand your experiences? And Dr. Hallman, does it take a war for both of y'all for us to find purpose? Because not all of us can be the greatest generation.
No, I don't think it takes a war at all. I think it takes a challenge. And we need to have in our country an opportunity to challenge young people. That was what ultimately made my life much more worthwhile than it would have been otherwise, because the Marine Corps challenged me. It might have been some other aspect of life where young people could get into sometime. Unfortunately, our colleges and universities don't challenge them as much as something like the military, or maybe after college they go to certain activities that challenges them more. I don't like to say this about any institution because I'm a part of one and have been all my life, and we do a great job. But I came to college after 4 years of growing up, and I benefited immensely from college as a result. I think a lot of young people waste a lot of time in college because they are free to do that. But freedom is what our society is all about, and I don't want to take it away from them. But you ask whether people have to go in the military, but if we're going to have a military, and the military is one of the most stable institutions in our society, without it, we wouldn't have the freedom to play around in college or whatever else. You know, freedom is the first and foremost, and as the colonel suggested, to have a free country. We wouldn't have it without the military. There are those here who would probably say, but the military is overpowering. We use it to disadvantage in the world. I don't happen to be one who believes that, but I know we're not perfect. But no, I think there are many ways to challenge young people. The University of Richmond, that's where we are. I think we challenge them about as stringently as they can be challenged academically and otherwise. And universities and colleges in 17 to 21 is a time to grow up. I just happen to be grown up faster than some, and it helped me.
I agree with Dr. Hallman. Thank you, sir.
You grew up in a hurry, I know. He just took a little longer growing up over there.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Dan Keenan. I'm one of the U.S. Marines for Colonel Thorns. I can't figure out your bridge verbal. 7 across, what was it?
No, it's 24 across. No, it was 5 by 5. There's 26 letters. Throw away the K. If you want to send a K in a letter, you'll use a C, and from context, so it's 5, 5, 5, 5, and 5. Then you tap the row and then the column.
I don't know, I screwed it up.
But that's
Something like that.
yeah. But you were a Marine, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But you know, he did learn to fly a helicopter.
Question at the back. Yes.
I read in the paper this morning where some source says that 70% of our young people between the ages of 18 and 26, I'm not sure the dimensions there, but 70% are not qualified or capable of serving in the military for various reasons. 70%, Bruce. How did this develop?
There are many, many reasons for that. I read it too, and it was distressing. The fact is, that shows something that few people understand, that some of the brightest, capablest of our young people are in the military. They don't take what is left over. A lot of us used to believe in my day during World War II, most anybody who had bad legs or arms were taken into the military, whether they'd been to high school or whenever. And I related to all those people. I was one of them, really. But today, the military is composed of people who are technically savvy, they're bright, they're high school graduates for the most part, and all of these others who are out in the world who are not challenged to go to college, who are not challenged to finish high school. That article covered it all. I have sympathy and empathy because I was one of those. I grew up, and I guess there are farm boys today like I was then, who never dream of going to college unless they happen to get out in the world and get inspired and understand that the people who are leading them are the educated people. Maybe I ought to be educated too. There are lots of stimulation that can bring that about. But how that happens is that people just don't understand how important it is to be educated. It's not just the young people, it's their parents, and we have generations of those.
Yes.
Well, I'm also a former Marine, and I know when I went from high school to the Marine Corps, same 4 years, same effect happened to me. My best education after all the college I've had was that period of time where I had to take a break from school. And I'm wondering, is it healthy to drive kids who really have no clue what they want to do in life just straight through another 4 years of school, or 6 years, and maybe the system is not set up where they are challenged in different ways. I don't know. I mean, school challenges you for sure, but I think now school's more of a place to go and not commit to anything as far as like life, your life experience.
Well, of course, we can point our fingers at educators, where most of us here. High school educators. I failed algebra twice in high school, and the professor that was failing me never once gave me any help whatsoever. He saw me as that dumb farm boy. I still feel it, you can see. And so I went through high school making C's, D's, and F's, even D in conduct. I don't remember being that. But that was the fault of the educational system more than it was this farm boy's fault. I know I can look back and see that. I went to my 50th reunion not too many years ago, and they asked me to speak because I was farthest away from my hometown. And one of my fellow students, who was a top basketball star — I couldn't play basketball because I had to milk cows — said to me, "I flunked the course also." Well, I felt a whole lot better because somebody else flunked it. But we can point to the educational system still today, and also the legal system that does not require these youngsters, and follow up to get them in the educational setting and then challenge them to do it, like the Marine Corps did for me. Excuse me, this man knows a lot more about this than I do. He had to spend a lot of time thinking about it, didn't you?
Your point's well made. When I got out of high school, I majored in baseball, basketball, football, and girls. I started college. I was no more ready. I met my wife the very first day, best day of my life, of course, of college. But I wasn't ready. And I went off to the military, and I was going to serve 4 years, come out and do what you did. It turns out I got a job flying airplanes, and so I've got my bachelor's and master's in the bootstrap program. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't ready to do it, and part of that was a bad high school, poor instruction. So, but by the way, can I just make a pitch towards Richmond for 2 minutes? University. Can I make it?
Yes, of course.
We'll be out here. We'll be out here in just a little bit, I'm sure, because there's a reception, they call it out there, and there's wine and everything. I'm not on campus. I was invited, and I'm treated so graciously, and get to do things like this. But I'm of the opinion that the University of Richmond is so unique. And I looked at your SAT, the scores of the kids coming in here and so on, and you're getting the best and the brightest in the country, I think. Your faculty is just outstanding. I think they truly are the best in the leadership field, and I'm not all field have the related disciplines that you have in this field. I think the University of Richmond, and I think you now got all the facilities here to step out. I think you should take on national, ethical, or leadership issues and become the leadership center, as you are, because you're the only real university, I think, that's got a degree in leadership. But University of Richmond, or University of Michigan, they're always quoted on business surveys and so on they do up there. They're highly, you can do that in leadership. I think anytime a leadership issue comes up, they should call this university and talk to the dean of leadership or the president. A couple of years ago, Sandra and I Dean Pert and I had a discussion on the ethics of selling kidneys. And it's a tough issue. And as you may have seen this morning, that was on the news. For $5,000 now, you can buy a kidney, and they'll match you up here. They'll send you to Israel or to China, and you got people who are very very wealthy and desperate because their kidneys are failing. You got a lot of people in the world who are very poor, and they are desperate to get that $5,000. And there's poor conditions. They have hospital claims they don't do it, but and people die on both ends. But issues like that's a very big ethical issue. And I think you can be the center on things like that. Is it ethical to get into the business of selling organs when you have these two desperate groups out there? And there's just the ethics. I think why are our kids, we old people say, well, they don't have the same values and so on we did. You know, since Socrates, they've been talking about courage, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Those values they're as real as the law of gravity, but we don't teach them, I don't think, as firmly as we should. Or kids now, well, you can't really judge people on values because values change in the settings and so on. Well, there's some values that are solid, they're real. And I don't know, in prison, I spent a year in a little cell, and off and on for a long time I thought, how do we keep our freedom? And I said, well, we have a strong military because we're challenged. Well, have military, you got to have a good economic base so you can afford a big military, a strong military. And I went on and on and on, and after about a year I came up, I was looking to design a coin, and I finally did. I put freedom on one side and I said, what's the flip side of that word, that coin? And that's responsibility. Now, and it took me a year to get there, and I had more time. I had enough time there. The thing I failed to figure out is how do you can teach responsibility, you can teach leadership, you can teach courage, you can teach justice, but how do you instill it? And that's the key. And I should have taken the time to figure out how to make these people responsible. But you have such a phenomenal wealth of students and professors and campus. I mean, you're so close to DC. You're the center of the world in leadership. And I think you can take a big step soon. Even bigger, I should say, because you're doing a phenomenal job.
Even bigger. Please join me in thanking our speakers. Leo always...
Thank you, sir. I'm glad I got to tell you. Thank you.
You can see that they're not yet finished, so if you would like to speak with them some more, we'll have a reception just around the corner, and you may have your books autographed and so on, and have conversations out where it's more comfortable with wine, and talk about the leadership school. Thank you.
Did I step out of line? Thank you.